Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
Hey, it's me, Egbert. E-G-G-B-U-R-T. Check out my website at egbert.com. Now it's back to those two dudes who told me they would bring in big ratings. They better are their history. Here are Brad and John.
It is bjshow.co. I have to say that very slowly, otherwise I'll screw it up. Did I get it right, John?
Absolutely right. You nailed it.
Okay, the initiative petition thing we talked about last break, about the fact that I've sort of done a 180 on that, and I don't necessarily look at it as being as bad as I thought it was. Essentially, it takes the power away from the legislators. Essentially, people can rise up, and if they organize into a group, and typically it's out-of-state companies or out-of-state interests with a lot of money that come into Missouri and do this, they change the Constitution. And to the point where, like, for example, I've got a thing that I have protested for years, and when I talk to any politician, they laugh at me because they don't quite understand. Well, they do understand what I'm saying. They think I'm full of it. I have a thing called the Island Law. You know what the Island Law is all about?
No, I don't.
Okay, give you a perfect example. In St. Charles City, not in the county, but in St. Charles City, there are over 100 unincorporated islands within the city of St. Charles.
Oh, yeah.
So in other words, sometimes it's literally one house. Sometimes it's a street. Sometimes it's a vacant lot. And for whatever reason, these were never incorporated into the city. It presents a logistical challenge because, and there was a case that was highlighted maybe 5 or 10 years ago. There was a double murder in what they thought was St. Charles City, and the St. Charles City police responded, and the detectives responded in the whole bit. And then someone realized that that wasn't actually in the city. The house was one of two houses that was in the county, so they had to, change everything over. So the idea being is that, and I know this is the case in St. Peter's and Wentzville and things like that. Okay, I have become the victim of that. And
how so?
More than once. Well, long, complicated story. Your buddy Rod Jetton, you know Rod Jetton, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, you know his village law thing?
I do remember the village law, yeah.
The village law was an interesting piece of legislation which Rod Jetton, I think, stuck into a bill and nobody knew it was there. And essentially what it was, and Rod was doing, don't get mad at me because I'll sort of maybe, and I've met him several times. I don't want to sound like I'm biased against Rod. I'm actually biased for Rod. But what he did was, apparently a friend of his was having some zoning issues in a county. I think this was down near the Branson area, and he wanted to do something on his property, and the county said, nope, can't do that. So they came up with this village law, which essentially stated that, and there were rules about it, you couldn't be within a mile of another city, that if you had, like, let's say you had a farm, and your farm was a 100-acre farm, and you wanted to do something on your farm, and the county said, no, under the village law, you could essentially become your own village. And all it took was you had to put it on the ballot, and then you had to have a vote. Well, let's take a perfect example. Let's say you had a farm where you had Mr. and Mrs. Farmer and their kids, and let's say the kids are both over 18 years old. They would have gone, under the village law, they would have gone to the county and say, hey, we want to become the village of Farmersville, okay? And the county would put that on the ballot. So mom and dad farmer and daughter and son farmer would go to the polls. They would vote yes. All four of the residents of Farmers Village would vote for Farmers Village, and they would essentially become a village. Well, when people found out this was in the law, the lawmakers went nutbags. I mean, they were, I can't believe it. They were talking about, this is going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. So there were several areas around the country, around the state, that with this law was still intact, were trying to form their own little villages. We're in Crapville, as a matter of fact, this is how Crapville got started. I'm down in, our transmitter sits down on Highway 47 in southern Warren County, okay? The farmers there have had an ongoing fight with the city of Washington. Even though the city of Washington is on the other side of the river. They own the airport. So technically, the city of Washington is in two spots. The city of Washington is in Washington, Missouri, as we all know it, on the south side of the Missouri River. But they also have several hundred acres on the north side of the river in Warren County, which is owned by the city of Washington. And Dick Stratman had a goal for that area. He wanted to make that into the next Chesterfield. He wanted to put in recreation fields down there because, once again, when you're on the south side of the Missouri River, it's very hilly. But when you're on the north side, it's flat as a board. So it's very easy to put athletic fields. You see the parallels to Chesterfield Valley?
I do, yeah.
Flat as a board. You got a major highway that goes through. In this case, it's Highway 47. Well, not necessarily a major, but you got a highway. And you've got an area that has an airport. Once again, Chesterfield Valley started with an airport. Then you put in businesses. Then you put in retail. Well, the farmers just lost their stuff over this. And they went, we don't want that, because he was going to eminent domain, because what he could have done was any of the property that was adjoining the airport, and that was all farm property, he could eminent domain it. He could say, well, I want your 30 acres, I want your 50 acres, I want 80 acres, the whole bit. So, long story made short, the farmers decided to use the village law, and they were successful. They're the only place in the entire state of Missouri that got successfully incorporated as a village. And it's called the Village of Three Creeks. And the interesting thing is, if you go to Washington, Missouri, and you talk to the typical person that's been fourth or fifth generation, or sixth or ninth or 20th generation Washingtonian, if you say, when you cross the Missouri River, when you go north on Washington, or 47 out of Washington, and you cross the river, where are you? And most people go, well, you're in Warren County. No. What city are you in? They'll go, what city am I in? I'm in Warren County. No, there's a city over there. What city is that? Nobody knows about it, because they don't put up any signs. They don't have a police department. They don't have anything. Matter of fact, if you go, and right now, if you don't believe me on this, if you go to Wikipedia and if you just go into Village of Three Creeks, I think the current population of the Village of Three Creeks is 5 people. And there's 1 or 2 homes that are down on the valley there. And the interesting part of it is, almost all the Village of Three Creeks is in the valley, except for one little finger which goes up on Highway 94, and interestingly enough, includes one house on Highway 94, which is on the bluffs. And you know who lives in that house?
Who's that?
The mayor of Village of Three Creeks.
By the way, the Three Creeks, according to Wikipedia, has a population of 4.
4. Oh, they've lost.
Now, wait a minute. As of the 2010 census, its population has risen to 6.
Yes.
Now, you were making a point, Brad, about the initiative petition process. I got you distracted about Rod Jetton and the village.
Well, no. But here's the interesting part of it was that if that would have been an initiative petition. And the interesting part, there's a whole crazy weird story about this, because this law only was on the books for a short period of time, because I can't remember who was the governor. Would it have been Nixon at the time? I can't remember.
In 2009, it would have been Nixon. Yeah, Nixon won in the 2008 election.
Okay, so they were so freaked out about this that the residents of the Village of Three Creeks actually voted early, because they were afraid that the governor was going to rescind this law before the election. So the election would have been the 2008 election. So they were,
and sorry to interrupt, but Blunt would have still been governor then in 2008. And then, so the election for governor was in 2008.
Right. So he pulled it out, but after the election. So that's the only place in the entire state of Missouri. And see, to me, I'm going like, okay, once again, here you go. You got the example of, let's go back in our history, okay? All the little places that, around the St. Louis area, except for the city of St. Louis. Take every little muni you want to talk about. St. Louis County, Ladue, Overland, Sunset Hills. Once upon a time, there was a little places in the middle of nowhere that decided, we're going to incorporate. Okay, we're going to become our own little city, right? And they could do that. It's almost impossible to do that now, because of the fact that the government doesn't want to have people who are in control of their own little destiny. Now, we all talk about the fact from time to time there's a news story in the St. Louis area about a city that disincorporates in St. Louis County. Every once in a while there's a story that so-and-so is disincorporated. I think there was a place down in South County called Landshire, that disincorporated a few years back.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
And the idea being is, as a small muni, you have responsibilities. You have to have fire protection, which means you have to, some kind of agreement with the fire protection district, or you have to provide your own fire protection. You have to have police protection. You have to have, and matter of fact, there's still quirky things. Do you know to this day that there's a very interesting thing with Kirkwood as far as utilities? Do you know this about Kirkwood?
No, I don't know that.
Kirkwood has its own electricity.
Who do they get it from?
Well, interestingly enough, a long time ago, and this is a carryover from way back when, a long time ago, they used to have their own electric generation plant in Kirkwood.
No way.
Yes. Now they get it from like the RECs. They contract with some of these rural electric companies, and they provide the electricity for Kirkwood. So if you are a Kirkwood resident, you pay your electric bill to the city of Kirkwood. You have Kirkwood power. Technically, you don't. And you go look at some of these old cities, like, for example, Washington, downtown Washington on Front Street, there's a place called the Tibby, T-I-B-B-E, Tibby Power Plant, where that used to be, you got your electricity from. They generated the electricity for a small portion of Washington. Very common all over the country. It used to be, you go to some of these big cities, and there was this guy over here had a power plant, this guy over here had a power plant, that kind of stuff. Then what happened was the big boys, like the Amerons of the world, came in and then bought all these guys out and consolidated. It's the same thing happened in cable TV. If you remember the history of cable TV came in the St. Louis area. You had Continental, you had Warner, you had all these different companies, and then one by one, they consolidated into what ultimately became Charter, and then obviously Spectrum. And once again, it was because each little city wanted to have their own little fiefdom as far as their
that makes sense.
Their cable TV. So anyway, the idea being is that the man wants to control us. The man won't let us have our own little town.
But if you're a state legislator, wouldn't you consider, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, wouldn't you consider the man to be the federal government? So at every level, and if you're the federal government, wouldn't you say that the man is the United Nations?
Well, but you're exactly right. It's all relative. If you're like St. Charles City, and the county says, "Hey, city, you can't do that," then you go, "Well, who are you?" "Well, we're the county."
Then Steve Ellman is the man.
Right. And then Governor Parson says, "Hey, Steve Ellman, we heard what you're up to. You can't do that."
Yeah, knock it off, pal.
Right. And then one day Governor Parson wakes up and some guy from D.C. shows up at his doorstep and says, "Hey, Governor Parson, you can't do that."
That's right. Some pointy-head bureaucrat with a Fed jacket on comes in and says that.
It's just layer upon layer upon layer, right?
It is.
But then ultimately in the lower level, which is funny because you watch some of these videos now on YouTube, and once again, I'm a YouTube freak. I watch all this crazy stuff. The HOA videos. Now, I don't know if these are fake or not. Have you seen some of these HOA videos?
I haven't seen them, no. Are they conflicts between HOA people and normal human beings?
Once again, I don't know if these are fake or not, but they're typically doorbell videos where the video is literally a Ring doorbell, and someone walks up to the door and they start talking to the doorbell. "Hi, I'm Ginny, and I'm from the HOA." And like, one's really funny. And like I said, if this is fake, it's funny. If this is real, it's 10 times funnier because she's complaining about this person gets too many packages on their door delivered by, Amazon
UPS
and
or Amazon
FedEx and UPS, and that the HOA says you can only have 2 packages on your door at one on your front porch at any point in time, and her husband's going to come by and he's going to collect the fine, and I'm going like, okay, and
good grief! Yeah, if that's real, that's incredible.
Well, once again, you watch these and you go like, okay, if this is real, this is really sad.
If they really want to micromanage everything, they should just get elected to the state legislature. They should run for the legislature like everybody else.
But see, don't you find it fascinating that we are a country that came from, for the most part, all us white European, descendants, although you're not totally white. You're what, Bangladeshi? What
1% Senegalese, yes.
Senegalese, okay.
Acknowledge it, Brad. Acknowledge my genetic superiority here.
Hey,
being more diverse.
Well, my grandfather was an illegal immigrant, so
that's true. That's true.
I'll acknowledge that as well, too. My father, when he found this out, all of a sudden realized he was first-generation American, and on my father's side, I'm a second-generation American.
But your point is that we all came here from Europe up, and why?
Well, because of the fact that we didn't like to be told what to do. We didn't
That's
like.
right. But Brett, hold on. I got to interrupt you here. You're making a huge assumption here that people walking down the street know why the United States was formed and know why people
they
came
don't.
here and know the concept of freedom and liberty.
Well, it was just like yesterday. I heard some guy talking about the fact that you can graduate from Harvard and you can have, and the only class you can have in constitutional law was some crazy weird class that just barely touched on constitutional law. And I'm thinking to myself, how do we not teach how we got to where we're at? And if you
Well, because you can't learn that stuff without knowing everyone's pronouns, Brad.
I guess.
And if you don't know what to properly call Harriet Tubman or the student sitting next to you, like, you got to start with the foundational building blocks, Brad.
Well, but once again, I'll go back to what I was saying before, and let me amplify on this. We came to this country because of the fact that we didn't like to be told what religion to practice, and that is an English thing, because England had the Church of England, and if you didn't belong to the Church of England, you were forced to belong to the Church of England.
Yep.
There was no religious choice, okay? You had the situations where in the British government could say, hey, one day you get a knock on your door, and here's Captain so-and-so of the British Army. He says, hey, we're in the area, and we need a place for 10 of our soldiers to stay, so they're staying with you. So you were, and once again,
you will quarter them.
You were quarter them, okay? All these things that we didn't like about the English system, the essentially the revolutionaries or the constitutionalists, whatever you want to call them, the founding fathers, whatever, and even to the point where I've heard you're not supposed to use that term anymore. Have you heard this?
What, foreigners?
Founding fathers.
Well, is that because it's patriarchal?
Well, it's first off, you're not supposed to use, that's part of this deal with the Secretary of State's office. You're not supposed to use mother, father, sister, brother, that kind of crazy stuff. Founding meaning that they didn't really found our country. It goes back to 1619, which is the 1619 project.
Oh, yes.
So
Great points.
Right. So the founding fathers, by that term, there's two words in there that you hear. It's a two-word term, and both words are bad. So in other words, the idea being, we came to this country for freedom, but yet we don't have any freedom anymore, because this is the basis of libertarianism. The basis is that we've let this slow incremental creep, and it's even worse when you get to places like Massachusetts, when you get to California. Matter of fact, there was an article just yesterday that I believe next month the Remington gun factory will shut down in this small town in New York State. And
I saw that yesterday and thought of you brought that up yesterday on the show, Brad.
Right. And it's been there. This plant has been there for over 200 years. And the article talked about there's one family, there's a husband and wife that work there. Their sons and daughters work there. Their in-laws, their sons and daughter-in-laws work there. The old man who's now in his 60s, his father worked there. His grandfather worked there. And all of a sudden it's gone. Why? Because they've made it so tough for these companies that produce guns that they've moved. Smith & Wesson moved down to Tennessee. Remington moved to Georgia. And once again, there was a matter of fact, it hasn't been that long ago. I think it was only 3 or 4 months ago. They had a big grand opening party at the new Smith & Wesson plant down in Tennessee. And you could go down there and you could tour the place, and and the governor was there, and the same thing in Georgia. The Georgia government
Some states are open for business. You're right.
Do you know for a while we had Smith & Wesson in Columbia, Missouri? Did you know this?
I did not know that, no.
Yeah, I think they had a distribution plant there, and they had it for a while, and I believe when they decided to consolidate everything down in Tennessee, they shut it down. I don't think it's there anymore. But once again, it's to the point where, you see, here's the crazy thing for me. You can have legally manufactured products like guns, and you have states that want to kick them out. But yet we can have illegal products, a.k.a. marijuana, as far as the federal government's concerned, and that's okay to produce in a state like Missouri.
But Brad, because people need it, and they need it for mental health. And also, we should also point out that if the good Lord, a.k.a. Bernie Sanders, has his way, then we will have a little bit more clear warning labels on food.
Can you believe that?
I mean, I don't know why every gun doesn't have to have a big 4-inch by 4-inch warning label on it, Brad, that says that this thing might shoot projectiles, which could be detrimental to your health.
John, let's pick up on what you just talked about, because once again, I read that yesterday. I thought to myself, oh my God. I mean, this is like ridiculous.
We need government telling us what to do, Brad. Government should be our daddy.
Well, that's the problem. The problem is that government shouldn't be our daddy or our mom. John, you can't say that it should be our daddy. That's not. You can't do that anymore. You can't say things like that.
That's right. The government should not be our founding fathers.
You can't say that
either.
Our
founding humans.
You see, I've got one, when this whole thing started, I get people who got mad at me because I called myself a non-birthing person.
You're a non-uterus haver. That's
right.
The uterus haver thing is a real thing. I'm sure you've seen that before.
Yeah. God, it just goes so weird. Okay.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?